You can also, if you haven't discovered it, there is a QR code on your binder where you can scan and connect to your CEU, the electronic version. And of course, you can do it also in paper at the front desk, registration desk. So this is a continuation of the conversations we've had the last few years with practice and academia. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our president and moderator, Elizabeth.
So good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us in this very important conversation. So I'm Elizabeth Camargo, your 2025 president. A couple of years ago, we began inviting the deans and directors of schools of architecture in Florida to participate in a discussion about education and practice at convention. This year, we have a chance to change the format a bit to have a discussion with one of the newest directors of a school of architecture in the state, Ron Dulaney Jr., AIA, from the University of South Florida, in my backyard, who is also a licensed architect. He comes to us from West Virginia University, where he also served as mayor of Morgantown. Welcome, Ron. Would you like to share who was it represent Morgan?
Good morning. So it was a little bit easier last year when I was one of 4 up here, one of 5, and I could hide in the crowd. But I'm going in love this year with Beverly. Appreciate the opportunity to engage in this conversation. I know that we'll have a good one.
Thank you, Ron. So also part of today's discussion is Beverly Frank, AIA. She served as president of AIA Florida in 2023, where she initiated the first discussion between the profession and academia at convention. She serves on the Board of Architecture and Interior Design for the state of Florida, and she also teaches at USF. She's an alumni of the program and was part of the search committee for the director of USF. So she helped us find one. So one of the things I wanted to do this year is to celebrate the success stories. So with our vision of celebrating successes, Ron, could you please tell us what's going on well with the program?
Sure. So the question is what's going well with the program. So I should preface that anything I say today is with a year of experience in this role and at the school. So I'm still learning my way through this. But I think one of the things that is going really well at the University of South Florida School of Architecture and Community Design really has to do with the origins of the school, which is in the early 1980s, when there was no School of Architecture in Tampa. The architecture community advocated for an architecture program to be located in Tampa. And as part of their advocation, they raised at the time $150,000 in scholarships for future students in this program that had not yet been established. And so I think what that's ultimately in 1986 the school was founded, but I think that really has established a pattern of strong connection between the practice community in Tampa and the School of Architecture and Community Design. We are the only school of architecture and major research university on the west coast of Florida. Our origins, we have focused from the beginning on urban design and urban conditions, and we continue to do that. And so I think that one of the things that I hope to do here is to continue to build on those strong relationships between practice and academia. It's really we have tremendous resources being located here in Tampa, and I think that we can be a resource for the practice community just as the practice community can be a resource for schools. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Ron. So the next question is for you, Beverly. Why was it important that the new director of USF be a licensed architect?
Great question. As a board member in AIA, and I've been involved in AIA only 11 years. I mentioned that this morning. So for any younger people here, any time is a great time to get started in service and advocacy. But with AIA, we talk about AIA being the voice of the profession. And this year in particular, we faced a lot of challenges at the state level with legislation that threatened to further minimize or marginalize the role of architects within our community, including licensure and continuing education. We're both on the chopping block. And so, it's very important to advocate and to promote the value of architects. And as civic leaders and people that are responsible for health, safety, and welfare, as well as Ron mentioned, one of the beautiful things about the School of Architecture at USF is the community design component and the understanding that architects touch everything we do. So in terms of that voice, we have the ability and the responsibility to have a profound impact on the built environment and, again, people's health, safety, and welfare. So all that being said, we've talked about bridging the gap between academia and practice and having a licensed architect to help promote the value of not just all of the amazing things that have to do with conceptual derivation and really exploring ideas and design that blur the boundaries sometimes between reality and imagination and discovery. I think it's just as important to understand that ultimately we have to build things and they have to be able to stand the test of time and promote health, safety, and welfare. So I think that's what having a licensed architect responsible for steering that ship is really important.
Thank you, Beverly. And the next question, I'd like both of you to address it. So thinking about this presentation we had earlier this morning about AI, the discussion on how we are preparing the future generation of architects to a relatively uncertain future is of extreme importance. How can architectural curriculum better reflect real-world challenges, including emerging technologies? And given your both backgrounds in practice and academia, since you teach now as well, I think it would be great if you both could address the question from your perspective.
I think it's a great question, and not being full-time academia, I don't know the answers. I know that the challenges, Ron can speak further to going through accreditation right now, which I don't know how you guys do it without your hair being on fire.
Thank you, Beverly.
But it's a huge lift, accreditation for people that are not aware. It's, again, they're trying to do everyday business of educating their students and then pulling all of that together. They deserve a huge round of applause, let me tell you. Huge round of applause. But that said, I think that there are nuances, and accreditation criteria are bogged down in years of process, and technology is changing more rapidly than that accreditation criteria, right? So from a practice standpoint, we thrive on injection of young professionals coming into practice to bring us the kinds of, frankly, we don't have the funds to do R&D, and when 99.9% of architectural practices are small businesses, we rely on that connection to be able to infuse practice with R&D, including, whether it's new rendering programs or other software, but now with AI, just the ability, how do you promote efficiency and viability and profitability in practice? And I do think that if you ask most people that recently have graduated, the biggest disconnect is understanding business. And I was fortunate enough Ron asked me to teach professional practice this past year, which is always wonderful for me in practice as well. So I think that those are all things that higher ed can offer us.
Yeah, so this question usually gets at the point of contention when there is contention, and that is the role of education, and especially the role of professional education and the role of training for the discipline. And so I firmly believe that that one of the roles that academia really maintains two roles, two primary roles. I think the first one is, in some ways we're stewards of the discipline of architecture, and I would distinguish between the discipline of architecture and the practice of architecture. We also are educating our students for very uncertain futures. Even the things that we know about the design process are that they're generally are ill-defined or under-defined. We're really solving, in some ways, wicked problems every day. And so I think that education, in the sense of broad education, developing critical thinking, developing analytical skills, being able to work in a very fast-changing and sort of undefined set of situations. I think that's what we're preparing our students for. We're really preparing them for surprise primarily, which I think is the role of education. Which I think, I'm drawing from James Carr's finite infinite games here, but I think that training is really about preparing students against surprise. Now that said, I think that one of the reasons that I entered academia was because I had a pretty rough transition from school into practice, and then as a practitioner, as a young practitioner managing projects, I saw the young interns in the office struggling with many of the same issues, and I thought, well, there must be a way that we can begin to ease this transition from the academic side. And so that's one of the things that I have tried to do. So I think our primary responsibility is to educate the student broadly, and then we begin to prepare them for practice as we know it in the moment, and as far as we can project it into the future, which generally we're not very good at predicting the future. And then I think the other part of all of this is the innovation piece, and I think that listening to the presentation, the keynote yesterday morning, and this notion that HKS, a lot of the large firms, as Beverly just indicated, they have the capacity to do R&D internally, and I think they're doing important work, and they are sort of moving the discipline in that way. And as Beverly alluded, most practices are comprised of 10 or fewer employees, and so I think that one of our primary roles needs to be innovation, right, which gets to research, which is one of the fundamental responsibilities of a public research institution. And so in that way, I think that one of our roles is to begin to support the profession, support practice by beginning to partner with practices and begin to provide support in terms of that research and development that needs to happen in order to sort of redefine the practice, if you will, or redefine the profession, as our keynote just a couple of hours ago ended his talk.
Thank you, Ron. And just to thank you a little bit on what you're saying about preparing students for, what was the word you used?
Surprise.
Surprise, right. And I think when we prepare students for surprise, having flexibility, it's one of the, I would say it would be a key quality to have, so you can rapidly switch to something else. And I think that's also part of the creative process. We need to be creative not only on how to solve a design problem in terms of putting the forms together, but be creative on how we organize our mental processes and can adjust to unexpected situations. So I think that's very, very much along the line. And we tie back to our keynote speaker yesterday talking about doing more with less, being creative and flexible. So I think we are tying up all these concepts together in a very positive way.
So moving next, we hear often that architects are losing their market share, and there seems to be an eroding of the profession at the edges. Do you think architecture is losing relevancy? And if so, why and how we can counteract that?
We had a Women in Architecture breakfast this morning, and I touched on this a little bit, but I notice it as, we like to call our practice a teaching studio, because we hire a lot of interns, young architects. And particularly after COVID, I've noticed this huge shift, and it's a fear of risk, and how that translates to young professionals entering into practice is, being given responsibility. All of a sudden, you're no longer just working on your projects, now you're having to collaborate and work in practice, and how do you make that transition boldly when you're challenged in architecture school? Typically, you're not given a lot of information, you're given a brief, and then you go off and take that and explore possibilities. And yeah, in practice, I like to think personally that we give young professionals time to grapple with certain issues, but there's an expectation to rise to the occasion and bring to the table what you learned, the whole thought of learning how to think and applying research and doing the things that you learn in school. And then all of a sudden, there's resistance, like there's this unknown. And for those of us who've been practicing for a while, you forget to put yourself in those shoes sometimes, but a resistance to doing the similar things that you did in school because you're afraid of failure. But in practice, you have to bring value right away because, we work on margin and we expect to have a certain level of production in order to be profitable, and at the end of the day, pay young professionals the salaries, which is a whole nother issue and argument that they expect to have coming into practice. So I think for me, it's trying to help culturally get students over this fear. It's an intolerance of risk, but fear tolerance as they come into practice.
Can I add something?
Yeah, so I'd like to just maybe address the erosion at the margins of architecture, because I do think this is important. I think it's important in terms of the relevancy of practice, and also the relevancy of schools of architecture. I think if we retract as a profession, then we are surrendering what we do at the margins, and we are losing opportunities for influence. I think that, so a couple of things about this. I think one, I think an architectural education is an excellent education, whether you become an architect or not. And I because of the soft skills that you develop through that process, I think often our focus is on developing practitioners. That's our focus. But I think, one of our important roles is to educate the public more generally, and also to educate. We need to educate people about the value of architects and what we do. And so, students who come into our programs and leave our programs and do something else have had that exposure to architecture, and I hope have a greater appreciation of what we do. But I also think that that's the importance of non-accredited undergraduate degrees in particular, is that it gives students more flexibility. And I think that when we work collaboratively, if we have schools where we are teaching interdisciplinary courses in urban design, urban planning, GIS systems, even engineering, sustainability, health, right, is a big one, housing, then I think that we begin to sort of have an influence, real estate development, we begin to have an influence on those disciplines, which I think is beneficial. So I think in some ways we should be pushing outward more, rather than retracting as a profession, rather than retracting within our schools of architecture. we want to just keep pushing outward to expand our influence. I think not so much that we want to replace these other disciplines, but we want to engage with them, and we want to position ourselves at the beginning of projects, at conceptualization of projects, so we're not coming into something that has already been set up, but we're rather formulating in terms of policy, in terms of developing those early parameters for projects who are going to have more influence at that point. And I think that we'll be more successful as practitioners, and I think architecture will expand in terms of its relevance.
Yes, so frequently we are legally also charged to address health, safety, and welfare of the public. And I was just wondering how much of that is transmitted to students during the program. Do they understand that that's what they will be responsible for when they leave the school?
I mean, we hope so, right? I mean, that fundamentally, I mean, that's why we're a licensed profession, right? So, yes, I know, I mean, I think every program, just by the nature of accreditation, you have to be able to demonstrate that your students have a fundamental understanding of certainly the building codes of ADA. Oftentimes that sort of happens at the scale of egress, maybe not as consistently at the scale of material selection and whatnot. But yes, we expect that our students do know that that is an important part of being a licensed professional as they sort of forge their path ahead.
Have you been addressing that professional practice class?
I have, and I have to share anecdotally, I'll never forget this story. I think Steve Cook, we can't see by the way, which is probably a good thing. But Steve Cook would tell this story about licensure back in the day when you had to draw by hand and you'd take your board and you'd sit for 10 hours or whatever, doing all your exams at one time. And he said he had a colleague that thought that they did really well and got results, and he thought that he made one mistake, and the mistake was he had doors, I'm paraphrasing Steve, but had doors that were swinging in instead of out, and he thought that was the only mistake he had made. And so he failed the exam, and when he went and did his debrief at the time, he said, well, that was my only mistake, and the response was, well, somebody died because of that mistake. And I've always remembered that story, and I think most of us will distill something down and say, well, it's only this, but that one thing could be the critical thing. And so for young people entering the profession, you're under direct supervision, but you're a professional and you're there engaged in your work on a daily basis, and we make a million decisions throughout the course of a project. So, you know, human nature is you could make a mistake, and we do our best to make sure everything's coordinated and that you're working in collaboration with a whole team of design professionals. And again, to your point, as architects, it's our responsibility to choreograph that whole thing as well. So that's a lot of responsibility. And last thing I'll say is, you know, I remind students frequently that if you're in med school and you're doing your residency, you don't just go home at night and sometimes you crash, but it's your responsibility to continually improve yourself. And so you're reading journals, you're doing sessions where you're observing other people in practice. And so as design professionals, it's incumbent on you that your education doesn't start and end with school and getting your degree, or even with licensure. It's a lifelong commitment to learn and hone your craft, and none of us are ever done. We're always learning new things. Technology's always changing, so you can't just stop at the end of the day and think that you're done. You constantly have to be learning. So I think that all very succinctly ties into why we're licensed for health, safety, and welfare.
Thank you.
So I like what you just, this expression you just used, we are here choreographing all the other professions. So how do you think architects can uniquely contribute to integrated design processes compared to other professions? So what separated us from the other professions, and what do we learn in school, and what skills do we acquire to prepare us to be in charge of this choreography?
So, I think it comes back to, in some ways, our ability to begin with uncertainty, and in many cases also end with some uncertainty. And coming to find a process where we can move forward and we can begin to synthesize many varying parameters. We have a way of sort of organizing chaos and developing a rationale, a logic, telling a story, right, through the design process, even if it's a story for only ourselves, that allows us to know how to finish, right, or to know when we're finished. And so I think that is kind of the essential character of architectural education, is to give students the knowledge to sort of work in that way. I think beyond that, as architects traditionally, and some of our engineering and interior colleagues, landscape architecture colleagues might not necessarily like this position, but I think traditionally we have been the sort of, we've taken the lead, right, on projects, and we are responsible for coordinating all of the systems and disciplines within the project. And so I think that, that idea of integrated design, we don't necessarily have to know every aspect of every system, but we need to understand how the systems work together, and we have to be able to coordinate those systems. And so I think to that end, that is synthetic thinking at its kind of basic level, which I think that architectural education does a great job at preparing students for. And then I think what we can do within the context of the 5 or 6 years that we have students is we can introduce the varying systems in a building and sort of prepare them for that next step, which is the internship. And I understand it's not quite so linear anymore. Some of us, it was very linear, right? When we came out of school, for the most part, you did your 3 years. You may have gotten 6 months or 8 months of your internship done over the summers, but for the most part, you came out, it was education, it was your internship, and it was your licensure. I understand now that we're starting to blur those boundaries a little bit, but yes, I think that's what we can do on the educational side.
I think in terms of practice, it's fundamentally you're taught how to be really creative and how to do more with less, hopefully. We talk about sustainability, another anecdote. So in addition to being on the search committee for Ron was actually one of my professors in school. So he taught at USF when I was in my formative years. And I'll never forget one of the things that he taught that always stuck with me, and to me is the most sustainable way to design, is reminding the students in the class that everything you do is based on some kind of module. And so if you're a really responsible designer, whether you're designing a countertop or whatever you're designing, you're either dealing with 4x8 sheets of plywood, or you're dealing with countertops that have a certain modularity, and yet in the plasticity of Revit, like, you can draw whatever you want and not put mullions or other things in and not really think about that modularity, and that runs into an excess of expense. And I say that to say, when it comes to choreography, where I think we're more creative than our counterparts are, I see it probably, no offense to any MEP engineers, but on the MEP engineering side more than structures, is like, what are the consequences of what's being specified in conjunction with our designs, and how are we being responsible stewards to our clients? So again, the responsibility of students to constantly hone your craft, and not just what we do and how we do it, but how our engineers do things, so that we provide even more value. And it goes back to the previous question of how do you provide value so that we can deliver the designs we want to deliver without being on the chopping block, because nothing irritates me more than you spend all this time and effort to get into the design, and then you're asked, okay, we need to start VEing, so architect, what are you going to take out of the project? And it's all the things ultimately at the end that you see, instead of the systems and how they went together, and did we do the correct takeoffs, and were we creative in how those systems go together? So I think that's one of the ways that, in terms of choreography and tying together what you learn in school and what you bring in practice, is really important.
Thank you. So changing subjects a little bit, I was wondering if the AIA, if there is any way the AIA can help the transition from school to practice.
Yes. I mean, I think, we talk about the gap, and that might be a question that's going to come explicitly in a few minutes. But, I think that it's important, I think, for all of us, both academics as well as practitioners and academic practitioners, to recognize that the education of an architect has two primary components. One is the formal education that one receives in school, and then one is the the internship or the AXP, whatever you want to call it, whatever it's called at the moment, right? And I think that system that we have created requires a commitment from all of us to that system, or we need to change the system. And I think there's some serious thought going on about that, right? Do we change the system? How do we change the system? But I think that there's too much to know, too much to learn, to think that, and I think that making the learning relevant to students, I think it's too much to expect that all of that is going to happen within one's formal 5 or 6 year formal education. So I think that we need to continue to think about this as a partnership, right? That the education of architects requires a partnership, and perhaps greater clarity about where do we meet, right? Where is that middle point? Where generally are we trying to get students? Because really, I think traditionally, education has tried to get students to a beginning point, to a point where they can begin as a professional in practice. And then again, I know it's not so linear anymore, but then there, the project management, the office management, construction documents, CA, right? All of that is part of the AXP. And frankly, it's going to be more relevant to students to learn those things in practice when they're actually doing them every day or every week than it is as an abstraction to learn those things within a classroom environment. So I think, number one, I think we have to have clarity together on sort of where is that meeting point. And then I think, beyond that, I do think that there are opportunities at USF. We're exploring opportunities to partner with practices to develop, to conduct research, right, that would benefit and feed back into the practice community. And some of that is around technology. Some of that is around creating opportunities and events, symposium, where we can begin to take on these types of issues. And I think, one of the challenges is always resources, right? So the RAND report, which was just published, which was a follow-up to the Boyer report, talks about that explicitly, right? Like time and money continue to be challenges for all of us, right? And the same is true in education, right? So are there ways that we can partner? Are there ways that we can partner in terms of funding? Can the AIA, perhaps AIA Florida or local chapters, are there issues that are pressing issues for the practice community? And
can funding be made available for R&D around those issues that would support student research, right, guided by faculty researchers, to begin to address those issues and begin to develop white papers, develop workshops and symposium where that knowledge is brought back out into the practice. So I think, you know, I tend to kind of want to think about these things as kind of reciprocal relationships, right? So that's a way that, you know, I think we're very constrained within a public institution in terms of our ability to expand, to do much more beyond kind of teach our basic courses. But I think that we need to be more of a resource. I think we can be more of a resource for the profession. And I think that benefits the profession and it benefits students because it immerses students in that research and in that development of innovation. And they're going to get out and they're going to bring that to the profession and drive the profession. And I think it's going to help them in terms of bridging as well.
Thank you, Noel. And I love the fact that you highlight the meeting point, and I think that's where we are falling behind. It's the gap between the meeting point and you stop a little too early, and I think practice expects you to, they expect the students to come to the job further ahead, and I think that's what the challenge remains, how we can bring those 2 points to the same place. Would you like to add anything back? Okay, so I'm going to go just one last question because I'd like to save some minutes for the audience. I'm sure there are other educators in the room that may be eager to ask questions. So we're talking about the value of architecture, and both of you have been public figures, you as the mayor of Morgantown and you at the BOAID. So how can you incentivize more architects to apply for those kind of positions and help us bring to the public the value we bring to any realm with the skills we have through our education and practice?
I think, one, get involved, and BOAID meetings are public meetings, and I've been going to BOAID meetings now, again, thanking the AIA. I wish I had known more earlier because I find them fascinating, and interestingly enough, the BOAID meeting for the middle of the year always coincides with this conference. So you have the opportunity to go to the BOAID meeting basically the morning before the annual meeting for AIA. And the Probable Cause Committee this year, actually talking about value of architects, said that it was one of the highest applications of fine for non-licensed activities that they had ever placed basically on a group of cases. And the number that I heard was $750,000 in fines assessed for unlicensed activity. So why is that important? Because we were on the chopping block this year for legislation, and it's not going to change next year. We have to be prepared to answer the call when it comes. And so when you have evidence of that, and it goes back to the earlier question when I was talking about risk tolerance, it's important for younger professionals to get involved right away. So I would highly encourage anybody who's interested. There's so many opportunities. Becky Magdaleno actually keeps a list, and it's a gubernatorial appointment or a public appointment list of all of the positions that are currently available for architects to be involved in, whether it's at a local level or at a state level. And she would bring that out, and it just so happened that 2 of them were available that I had applied for last year. So I love being at that moment where you get to be involved, and instead of complaining about something, make a difference about it and get involved at that level. But getting involved also means being aware. So if everybody in this room could go back to your colleagues and people in your office and just say, go get involved and be on some kind of public committee or a task force, or even run for city council, or as Ron did, for mayor of the city he lived in.
Yeah, so I think for me, it was not necessarily a made-for-architect role. I did 2 terms on city council and 1 term as mayor of Morgantown, West Virginia, when I was at West Virginia University. I was maintaining my full-time position, and while I was doing that. And for me, it goes back to one of the earlier questions about influence and erosion of the profession at the margins. I think we have to stick our necks out a little bit to have influence at the policy level. And so for me, I think that was the opportunity of holding a political office. And also, fortunately, I was not in a small city. I did not have a practice that could be jeopardized by sticking my neck out, right? So that's the other tricky thing about especially political roles is, you know, you've got to make sure that your employees are taken care of, and you don't necessarily want to do things that are going to jeopardize that. It was a college. We did have a town-gown relationship, though, and I did push some buttons at the university, and that's a story for another day. But, you know, for me, again, it's about trying to influence what happens, in that case, at the policy level. Because I was on city council, I was in a position to advocate for and actually win the support of council for a 12-acre major redevelopment project just in town, just off of the campus, outside of the central business district, which probably would not have happened if I wasn't in that role. And so I think, you know, that's one example of many, right? So I ran on a platform that looked at downtown revitalization, right, and looked at affordable housing policies. And what I learned in that role, though, is that I served on the Planning Commission as the council's representative on the Planning Commission. What I learned in that role was that, you know, when you're trying to take on an issue like downtown revitalization, you also get drawn into issues of houselessness and other conditions. It was during COVID, right? So we were having some pretty heated discussions about health policies during COVID at the scale of the city. And so what I ended up finding out was that, yes, I had influence, right, as an architect in terms of policy, but I also was spending a lot of time working through issues that it wasn't my intention to work through those issues, right? But once in that position, I had to. So this was the time of COVID. This was the time of the social unrest, right, in terms of protests. And so in the end, I think what I decided was that in some ways, I decided to pull back just so that I could focus more on the issues that I had expertise in, rather than getting kind of drawn into those adjacent or related sort of political issues. Not that there isn't a role for architects to sort of engage in those issues, but I felt like I've spent many days really doing things that were beyond my sort of wheelhouse, if you will.
You're choreographing much more than you anticipated, right?
Yeah.
All right, so at this point we are pretty much at time, but I wouldn't like to finish this session without giving you the opportunity to ask at least a couple of questions. So if we have anybody willing to come forward and ask, please. And I can't see if somebody raised the hand, I won't be able to see, so you need to shout. Please. Rick.
I'll just shout.
Thanks.
First of all, I just want to make a statement. Back in 1972, when I graduated from high school, the only public school of architecture was at the University of Florida. I had to use USF as a stepping stone to get to architecture school at the University of Florida, and I appreciated that I was able to do that. But to the point of educating the public, one of the greatest courses at the University of Florida was Architecture 101, taught by a guy named Ida Winarski. He was great, and it was open to any student in the university in their first 2 years of practice. And I'm just asking if that's available at the University of South Florida, because a lot of people learn a lot of things about architecture through Ira Winarski's 101 course.
Yes, We teach Introduction to Architecture. In the fall, we have 215 students registered for that. It is open to non-majors. It's taught by Robert Hudson, who many of you may have had at St. Pete College. So yes, we do teach Intro to Architecture, which is open and actually satisfies state general education requirement beginning in the fall. And our Architectural History 1 and Architectural History 2 courses are also open to students across the university, and they also satisfy state general education requirements. So we are doing that at that level.
And my second thing is just to follow up on what I call citizen architects. We have a program called Citizen Architects, and Beverly was right. Becky has a list, staff has a list of appointments that are available all over the state for architects to get involved in. The community will not know what we do until you get involved in the community. So I encourage everybody to get involved at the community level and go after their citizen architect thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
I've got the mic here.
Okay, anybody else?
Right here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you, Rick. My name is Angel Saki. I'm AIA Miami's immediate past president, and I'd like to thank not only all of the past presidents that are here, but the most recent that are up on stage and right here next to me for having done an incredible job throughout the years. And Beverly, for you having begun this commitment of tying academia with our practice. And Ron, you and I have spoken already a couple times. If we don't connect architecture to construction while they're in school, they still think they're drawing pretty pictures. And sometimes what I've seen, they're not that pretty. So my solution that I've been speaking about this now since I've been active at this level is that there's got to be some sort of a combination of the School of Architecture with those that are learning how to become general contractors, and perhaps tying this together within at least one course. I have to tell you, Materials and Methods isn't doing it because they don't touch this stuff. They don't remember it. One of my basic default questions to all of these young emerging professionals, and I feel a lot like you, Beverly, you know, where I'm constantly bringing in new students to learn and to be educated and mentored. They don't even know what the actual versus nominal dimensions of a 2x4, much less a CMU is. And that is so basic that how could you become an architect, graduate architect, begin the path of licensure and not know what your building blocks are? So this is how far the disconnect goes. So I leave that thought. You've probably heard it many times, but I think if we continue to say it, at some point it'll finally hit home that we've got to make the connection. One of my last podcasts that I was invited to speak, I said, we are not architects if we don't know how to build the spaces and projects that we design. So thank you again for all of you being here. Remember, everyone here in the group, I feel like when I come to these conventions, we're preaching to the choir because everyone that's here understands this. Please express these experiences and what you hear from all of us to your other friends that may not be members, and draw them in so that they understand the value of what we all do here together. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, there's a young lady here that's had her hand up very
And
patiently.
I think that should be our last question.
Thank you. Thank you both. I'm Taryn Sabia, and I'm here in Tampa, and I probably know many of you in the room. I'm also at the University of South Florida with Ron and Beverly, and when I was a young intern architect coming out of school, I was fortunate enough to have employers and a firm here in Tampa that was really supportive of my involvement in the community. And they actually counted my time sitting on committees with the Tampa Downtown Partnership, going to HART board meetings and others, as marketing time for the firm. And that was how they encouraged our participation in the community, and that has always stuck with me and carried through. And it was something I did seek out because I had faculty when I was in school that encouraged us to be engaged and involved, whether it was a community engaged master planning project or working with local agencies. And I'm curious if you have suggestions or recommendations as to how we can bridge between school and practice and help our young architects coming up be engaged in that way, and ways in which firms can help actually support that activity. It's hard to just get out and do it. It's hard to find that time if it's not supported in practice. So what are some ways that we might be able to provide that support? And again, the link going back and forth, right, on those years coming out of school and into practice.
Taryn, I think that's a great question. I think really instilling in the students as part of their education the importance of service and sacrifice. Because I'm seeing more, and I guess, you know, feel like I'm getting older when you start saying back in the day, but culturally, you recognize, and I've asked this question of some people, there's this almost, it's being seen as a toxic culture in architecture school where it's the building with the lights on. That's how you know it's the architecture school at 2 o'clock in the morning, and pulling all-nighters for architecture school. But then we see, and we don't expect that in practice at all. And we've never asked students or young professionals to work late. And in my practice, it's something I always say, I don't ask anyone to work overtime or expect it. If they do it, it's because it's something that has to be ingrained in them and passion in them to want to refine their work. But that said, there's an insistence that they do it, I think, because you want to excel when you're in school. And then when you're out of school, it's like, okay, I'm working a 9-to-5 job. And we all know architecture is not a 9-to-5 job. So that, again, I think it takes a little bit of dedication and a little bit of sacrifice. So investing in whoever your faculty leadership is for AIAS and NOMA and all of the NOMAS and all the organizations you have, and really trying to promote that life of sacrifice carries over to practice. And I will say, in my practice, we offer all of our employees 40 hours a year to volunteer your time. We'll pay for it to any cause that you want to put in, beyond which, if it was for practice, either AIA or CSI or something like that, we would fully support all of those things, including paying for your licensure and everything else. It's up to those people, though, to take advantage of that. So again, instilling that in the educational cycle, I think, is really important.
Hey, Taryn. Yeah, so I agree with Beverly. I think at USF, so when I came and, so this is my second stint here. I was here from 2002 to 2005. And then because I started a design build studio and was doing a project that was in a high wind area that needed permitting, I was leading a project done by students. Our schedule got way off the academic calendar. So I came back in the summer of '06 and the summer of '07 to finish actually building out the project we started. And then subsequently, I know at USF and I know other schools in Florida and beyond, we have run design build studios to the question about the relationship between construction and design, construction and architecture. So there are things like that I think have happened on the academic side. I will say that that type of work is really high burnout for faculty, because you are responsible for the health, safety, and welfare of your students on the job site, right? There's liability there. I know for me it was mornings that started at 6 and evenings sometimes until dark in the hot summer Florida sun, right? And you can only sustain that for so long. I do think that you know, at USF we do have a community engaged studios that are run. It's not necessarily a requirement for every student, although we are in the process of looking hard at our curriculum and figuring out what we really need to have in it. And then I think to Beverly's point about practice, I think, you know, recognizing, acknowledging that the students aren't going to know everything that they need to know. I know, again, I came out even longer ago than Beverly, but, you know, I had a very theoretical education, did a very theoretical thesis project, but I was hungry to learn the practice, right? So I would beg to go on construction administration visits, right? And, you know, the firm I was in did mostly schoolwork and the margins were low, and I understood that at the time, you know, it was a decent salary that they were paying me. And so I basically said, hey, if you take me out to the site, you know, I will make sure that I get my regular work done at the end of that day, right? And so I do think that some of it is initiative. I also just want to say that I think at USF we have an incredible student culture, and again, we're very fortunate to be in a place with, you know, in a thriving, growing area like Tampa, with a huge architecture community, and we have our students are incredibly driven and actually organize in collaboration with local practices, with CSI, with AIA, with Women in Architecture. They are constantly developing programs, right? Bringing practitioners into campus, doing ARE study sessions, doing mentoring sessions, doing firm walks. And all of this is happening directly between our students and our student organizations and the practice community. And I think that these are all incredible things that in some ways, as faculty, as a director, we can't take direct credit for. But I do think that as a faculty, and again, this started way before I got here, so I don't take any credit at all, but I think that the faculty have helped support that kind of culture where students are taking that initiative to do these things on their own, outside of scheduled coursework, without being required to do it, and they just do it, right? Which is amazing. And so, you know, it's sort of like parenting. When you have that situation, you just try not to screw it up, right? And so, you know, the challenge with all of these things, whether it's design build, or it's the community engaged studio, or whether it's student organizations with strong leadership taking these initiatives, is it doesn't necessarily reach every student, right? Because an individual student has to seek that out. And so I think that's kind of part of the challenge that we're wrestling with right now in terms of looking at our curriculum, is how do we make sure that every student sort of has one of those touch points? And so I don't have the answer to that, but I think that those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about.
Thank you, Ron. We have maybe one more minute left for one last quick question.
So, thank you. I'm Steve Lafferty, and I do teach a class at USF also. Let me challenge you to, and also any other that have from many other schools. So when I was at USF at the Director of Design and Construction, we had a unique opportunity where we had 3 projects coming out of the ground simultaneously within a block of each other. And so we said, why not use this as a learning opportunity for the design and construction side, which is normally very bifurcated from schools of architecture. Reached out, and we actually allowed and scheduled student tours of these 3 buildings throughout the process of construction. So over the period of 2 years, 4 semesters, we actually had over 1,500 students not students, but student tours through those construction sites where they could actually touch, feel, and see concrete going in the ground, air conditioning system. They could walk into an air handler and see those systems and how they're operating and how they're put in the sequence of going from foundation to structure to rough in to finishes. And I think that was very valuable, and I would challenge any other universities to reach out and work together. It's not that difficult, but it takes communication and an opportunity to capitalize on what's there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Don Yoshino. Thank you very much for the panel, and it was very interesting. And one of the things that, as I was thinking, as you were speaking of one area which I think is lacking in the education process, is more rooted to money and business. I don't think our students today are educated enough in the business practice of what we do as a profession. And I think we need to, we always hear architects don't get enough money, right? Our fees are too low. Why is that? And what does it take to make money and be successful as a practice? I know we do the health, welfare, and issues. That's part of our process. But have we learned, if more of us would say no when someone comes into our office, a client, potential client, and asks us the first question, they says, "How much do you charge?" Right? All they're looking at is money, the money part. They don't realize what it takes to do what we do. And I want people in all the firms to say no. When somebody comes in and says, "How much do you charge?" I want them to say, "Too much." Right? And then maybe we can afford to pay our interns and our staff a fee and for the education that they've taken to get there, 6-7 years to go through school. And what are we paying them to get out of school? Nothing. Really nothing for the amount of time and education they have. So I want to encourage maybe some more information at these sessions and things like that about how to say no. And that maybe within 5 years or 10 years, everybody's going to be able to hire at the proper rate the interns that come out of school so they can support their family and start a life. And the last thing I wanted to say was, I think in 2002 or something, Boca Raton had a committee put together on the future. What is Boca going to be in 2022? In 10 years, when I think this happened. And I volunteered to be on that committee because I wanted to know, they needed someone in architecture, somebody that knows about people, somebody that knows about environment, to be a part of the future of the city. And if they didn't have the foresight of having an architect on that committee, they would forget the real essence of our life and our lifestyle and our environment. So I just wanted to ask and to make sure that the education of talking about more about money, business, how we operate our business, and secondly, to encourage all of you to get on committees on the city, whatever it is that they need our thought process, because we know more about everything. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, Don. Please help me thank our panelists today for such an inspiring session. Thank you very much.